Hello and welcome to helpyourmath.com. In this video, we're going to look at multiplying rational numbers and writing the answers as decimals rounded to the indicated place. Before we get started with multiplying, let's review some tips for multiplying with fractions. First, we want to make sure that all numbers are written as proper or improper fractions. So if we have an integer, we can turn it into a fraction by putting the value over 1. For example, if I have the number 71, I can turn 71 into a fraction by saying that's the equivalent of 71 over 1. If I have a mixed number, I can write it as its equivalent improper fraction. And the way we do that, if we have 2 and 4/5, is what we do is we multiply the denominator to the whole part. So 5 times 2 is 10, and we add the numerator. That would give us 14 over 5. And the reason we do this is because every mixed number is actually an addition problem without the plus sign. So it's saying it's 2 wholes plus 4/5 more. And so what we'd be doing, converting it to an improper fraction, is we'd be saying, okay, well, 2 is equivalent to 2 over 1 plus 4 over 5. And if we wanted to add these two fractions, we would need a common denominator. The common denominator would be 5. So here, right here, is why we multiply the denominator to the whole part. And then once we've multiplied that, once we have the same denominator, we can add the numerators. So that's why we would add that result, 10, to 4, giving us 14/5. Pretty cool, huh? That's why it works. Okay, once we have the multiplication, we're going to look for common factors between any numerator and any denominator, and we can simplify those out. If there are any decimals within the fractions, what we might want to do is multiply that fraction by a factor of 1, disguised as the power of 10 needed to clear out the decimal point. So for example, if we have 0.6 over 4, we would need to multiply by 10 to move that decimal place 1. So we would multiply by 10 over 10, right? Because what this is a factor of 1 disguised as 10 over 10. If we had something like 0.14 over 7, we would want to multiply by 100 because we would need to move this decimal 2 places. So we would multiply the numerator by 100 and we would multiply the denominator by 100. But what we're really multiplying by is 1 because we do the same thing to the numerator and denominator. And so if we multiply by 100, we would have 14 over 700. Also, some tips for rounding before we get started. The place to which we need to round should be indicated. So that might be the tenths place, the closest unit or the closest whole number, hundredths place. Prepare to include one place past the indicated place for rounding. So if you're asked to round to the nearest tenth, you're going to have to know the hundredths place. If you're asked to round to the nearest hundredth, you're going to need to know the thousandths place, and etc. When we're rounding, if the digit in the position 1 smaller, so if we're rounding to nearest tenth and the hundredths place is between a 0 and 4, we leave the tenths place alone. It would stay as is. If we're rounding to nearest tenth place and the hundredths place is between 5 and 9, then we would bump the tenths place up 1 digit. So with an example for the first one, if we have 0.42, the 2 in hundredths place would tell the 4 in the tenths place to stay the same. So basically what that's saying is that 42 hundredths is closer to 40 hundredths than it is to 50 hundredths, which is why we would say this is approximately 0.4 because we would drop the 0 in the hundredths place. If we're looking at where the hundredths place is between 5 and 9, so if we have 0.47, the 7 would indicate to us that basically it's saying is that 47 hundredths is closer to 50 hundredths than it is to 40 hundredths. And 50 hundredths is equivalent to 0.5, so that's why the rounding happens. There is a special case if the digit to be rounded is a 9 and we're supposed to bump it up, it bumps up the next largest place too. So if we're rounding to the nearest tenth and we have 2.98, where the 8 tells the 9, okay, bump up a digit. Well, 9 is the largest digit. So then what happens is it actually bumps the next place, the units place up. And so we would say that this is approximately 3.0. We're rounding to the nearest tenth, so we do include a 0.0, even though it's 0. It's just the formality to say, look, there's my tenths place, and it's now a 0. And again, basically what this is saying is that 2.98 is closer to 3.00 than it is to 2.90. That's all it's saying. Okay, let's get started. We want to solve for x, and we're going to round our answer to the nearest tenth. So the first thing I want to do, anytime I see one single fraction, let's turn everything into a fraction. So this is going to be 170,000 over 7,000 times, and how do we turn 60 into a fraction? We put it over 1. Okay, so now what I like to do is I like to simplify before I multiply, and what I see here is that I have 3 zeros, which is the equivalent of a factor of 1,000. I have 3 in the numerator and 3 in the denominator, so really what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide by 1,000 in a very informal way by just crossing out the zeros. As long as I divide by the same amount in the numerator and denominator, it's a legit legal maneuver. Okay, so now what do I have? I have 170 times 60 over 7. 170 doesn't have anything in common with 7, no common factors. 60 has no common factors, so we're going to multiply straight across. Now, I don't actually know what 170 times 60 is, so we're going to go off to the side here and set up our multiplication. 170 times 60. We're going to have some zeros here. I'm going to have 2 zeros, courtesy of these 2 zeros. And then we would have 6 times 7 is 42. That would be a 4. And 6 times 1 is 6, plus 4 is 10. Okay, so our numerator becomes 10,200, and the denominator is 7. And what are we doing? We want to actually write this as a decimal rounded to the nearest tenth. So what we do is we're going to set up a long division. The divisor, the denominator, goes outside our division sign, and the 10,200 goes inside. What we also need to do, we're rounding to the nearest tenth, so we're going to add a decimal point. Here's our tenths place, here's our hundredths place. Move the decimal straight up into the quotient, and now we're going to start dividing. 7 goes into 10 one time, and that would give us 3 left over. Bring down the 2. 7 goes into 32 4 times. That would be 7 times 4 is 28. 32 minus 28 is 4. Bring down the 0. 7 goes into 45 times, minus 35. 40 minus 35 is 5. Bring down that last 0, that's part of the whole number. 7 goes into 57 times, so that's the last part of the whole part of this number. Minus 49, we end up with 1. Bring down that tenth, and we have 7 into 10 goes in once. I'm running out of space, so I'm going to go over here. That would be 10 minus 7 is 3. We're going to bring down that 0. 7 goes into 34 times. And then we can stop there because we just needed to know the 4. We don't actually care about the rest of the partial quotient there. So what does this tell us? The 4 tells the 1 in the tenths place to stay the same. So we're going to say that x is approximately 1,457 and 1/10. All right, let's look at another example. Here we're going to solve for a, and we're going to round to the nearest tenth. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to write this so that everything is a fraction. However, I don't really want to put this over 1 because if I put it over 1, I'm going to be dealing with a decimal. So instead, we're going to read it mathematically. To read that mathematically means we're not going to say 0.35. We're going to call it what it is, which is 35 hundredths. And that's exactly how we want to write it. 35 hundredths is 35 over 100. Now let's look for some common factors. So I know that 20 goes into both 80 and 100, so I'm going to divide both of these by 20. That would leave me here with 4. That would leave me here with 5. And then I know that 35 and 5 have a common factor of 5. 5 goes into itself once, and it goes into 35 7 times. What else? Oh, the 130. 4 and 130 are both even, which means they're both divisible by 2. So 2 goes into 4 twice, and 2 goes into 130. That would be 65 times. Okay, and now we're going to multiply straight across. I think that's it for the simplifying. So we have 2 times 7 is 14 over 65. And now what we want to do is set up our long division. So to set up our long division, the denominator goes on the outside, or the divisor, and inside the division is 14. We're rounding to the nearest tenth, so I'm going to add 2 places behind the decimal, the tenths place and the hundredths place. I'm going to move my decimal point straight up. Now we're going to start the process. 65 goes into 14 0 times, and we can just ignore that. 65 goes into 140 2 times. 65 times 2 is 130, and 140 minus 130 is 10. Bring down the 0. 65 goes into 100 one time, minus 65, and we don't even need to do this, it doesn't matter, we just needed the 1. The 1 tells the 2 to stay as is. So this indicates to us that A is approximately 2/10. A is approximately 2/10 because the 1 told us to stay as is. In our last example, we're solving for y, and yet again, we're going to round to the nearest tenth. Okay, so first thing I noticed is that we have some decimals in our first fraction, and I don't really like that. What's it going to take for those to be gone? Well, this one has 2 places behind the decimal point, so that means I would need to multiply this guy by 100 to clear out the decimal. This one has 1, so I would need to multiply by 10. So because I have to be consistent, I'm going to multiply both the numerator here by 100 and the denominator. That gives me 24. It's moving the decimal 2 places, moving the decimal 2 places over 450 times. And then here what I want to do is I really don't want this decimal point either, so I don't want to just put this over 1. This would be 216/10. So I'm going to write this as 216 over 10. Now I want to see if I can simplify anything before I multiply. One thing I noticed is that 24 and 10 are both even, or 216 is also even, so you can pick which numerator. Actually, there's a lot of things that are even here. So really, we're going to be simplifying the evens across the board. I saw the 24 and the 10 first, so that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to divide 24 by 2, that gives me 12. Divide 10 by 2, that gives me 5. Now I notice that these are both even, the 216 and the 450. So when I divide 216, if you don't know it, now I'm pretty good with arithmetic. If you don't know arithmetic as well as I do, don't feel bad, that's fine. Go off to the side and let's do our division. So I'm going to divide by 2. 2 goes into 2 once, and then that would be 0. 2 goes into, bring down the 1. 2 goes into 1 0 times. So we could just bring down the 6 here. 2 goes into 16 8 times. Okay, so this becomes 108. And 2 into 450 would be 225. Now this one's a little bit tricky, but it turns out that 225 and 108 are both divisible by 9. So we can divide them both by 9. I checked because if you add up the digits are something that's divisible by 9. And I'm simplifying just so that I have less work to do later. I get to deal with smaller numbers, which is nice. So we're going to divide these both by 9, which is creating a little bit of work for myself, but again, it might be worth it in the end. If you don't want to do all this and you just wanted to multiply straight across and then divide, that's fine too. 9 goes into 22 twice, that would be minus 18. 22 minus 18 is 4, bring down the 5. 9 goes into 45 25 times. This becomes 25. And the 108, I know that that's 12. Okay, anything left to simplify? I think we got it all. So now we're going to multiply straight across. 12 times 12 is 144. 25 times 5 is 125. And now we're ready to set up our division. So we have 125 as our divisor. It goes on the outside. 144 goes on the inside. We're going to add a decimal point and 2 places because we're rounding to the nearest tenth. Move the decimal point straight up and divide. 125 goes into 144 one time, minus 125. That would be 3. 14 minus 5 is 9. 3 minus 2 is 1. Bring down the 0. 125 goes into 190 one time, minus 125. And we're going to get, that's going to be an 8, 5, 6. Bring down the 0. 125 goes into 650 5 times. 5 times 125. Again, I'm really good with arithmetic, so I apologize for knowing this off the top of my head. If you don't know it, just come off to the side here and say 125 times 5. That would be 25. This would be 12, and this would be 6. So we end up with 625, which just perfectly fits under 650. Well, not perfect, but you know, it's really close. 650 minus 625 is going to be 25, but really we didn't care about that. All we cared about was that hundredths place was a 5. What does that 5 do to the 1 in the tenths place? It moves it up 1. So we would say here that y is approximately 1.2 or 1 2/10. These have been examples of multiplying fractions and converting the answers into decimals. Thank you for stopping by.